person will hear a crunch, crunch, crunch. Busy day, everybody else. I wouldn't say everybody. Okay, it is time for us to begin this morning. With us this morning, we have Tony Welch, who is from Marshfield, but he is a student at the Bible Institute of Missouri, taking there at KE, and so he's going to be bringing our Bible class this morning in our morning lessons. So be sure to greet him and let him know that he's here with us. If you haven't done so, be sure to pick up a bulletin in the back. We're going to go through this before Bible class, but be sure to pick one up, and we'll mention this more before the worship hour. And so that's everything I have, and so we'll begin our study this morning.
Morning, brethren. Certainly a privilege and a pleasure to be here speaking before you this morning. So, before we begin, I want to thank you for the opportunity to allow me to come here and preach before you. And I also wanted to say that on Friday, I was able to see the Ortiz family, and they would like me to tell you hi from them because they said that they know lots of you. So hi to all of you from the Ortiz family. So while we're going through this class, any comments and questions are welcome. If you do want to say anything, you're very welcome to. I will say that I have trouble understanding people a lot of times, so if anyone does have a comment or a question, just please speak up and enunciate your words so that I can understand you clearly. So, also, I don't know everything, so if there is something that I don't know, I'll just be honest and tell you, and I will find out, and I'll get your number from you, and I'll let you know as soon as I find the answer. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to go through the Beatitudes, which are found in Matthew chapter 5. So everyone can hear me okay, right? Do I need to move the mic closer or anything?
A little closer.
Is that better?
Yes.
So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5 this morning. We're going to look at some of the Beatitudes of Jesus. So these are very important teachings of Jesus today in the New Testament. And what Jesus does here is he takes the basics of the law and he goes deeper into the heart of the matter, deeper into the heart of each of the individual laws. Because many of these laws, if not all of them that he mentions, were being practiced merely externally by the Pharisees and the people of the time. Well, God doesn't want just the actions of the law. He also wants the heart of the law. And that's what Jesus was trying to drive home to them, because that's what they weren't doing. So this is mostly what Jesus tackles here. He's trying to get them to look deeper into the laws. So we're going to start there in Matthew chapter 5. Our first section is going to be verses 13 through 16. So let's read that really quickly. This says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So what we see here is that Jesus says that we are the salt of the earth. So what does it mean to be salt? Well, we have to look at what exactly salt is and what it does. Salt is something that gives food flavor. It gives something different to it. It enhances the flavor of the food that you're eating. So food without salt can be basic, and it can be bland sometimes, and it can be just exactly what it is. But salt adds something different to it. It gives it something better. It gives it more flavor. It gives it more elegance. So we're being compared by Jesus as salt, as Christians, because we have something different. We're different from the world. The world around us is all the same. It's all in sin and it's all in darkness. And that's a very sad truth, but unfortunately it is the truth. But we as Christians, we're different. We have something different that the world doesn't have. We have a hope. We have a better law. We have a way of being saved. We have something that isn't darkness. And so we're supposed to be the salt of the earth because we're to add something to it. To an already dark world, we're to add Christianity to it. So this is what it means for us to be the salt of the earth. So if the salt loses its flavor, then what good is it? What happens if the salt loses its flavor? At that point, if it loses its flavor, it's useless. So likewise, what if a Christian ceases to be a Christian? What if he ceases to show forth those attributes that make him different from the world? Well, if salt stops being salt and it stops adding flavor, at that point, it's useless. Well, a Christian who is no longer being a Christian is also useless to God and to his kingdom. As Christians, we have to be an influence to the world. And if we're not this influence, then we're useless to God and we're useless to the continuing of his kingdom. So at this point, the only thing you can really do with that salt is just throw it away. Because at that point, it's not good for anything. So the salt is just thrown out. So for the salt, this could mean being thrown into a trash can or being thrown out into a mud. But for Christians, being thrown out or cast out means hell. It means an eternal punishment because we're not living right. And I certainly don't want that. And I know you guys certainly don't want that either. So the only way to avoid this is to keep being Christians. To keep showing those attributes that make us Christians. We have to add something to the world and show forth the light that is God and his word. So the next thing that we're compared to is we're compared to the light of the earth. Well, being light is similar to being salt. Darkness is the absence of all light. You don't turn on the dark, you simply turn off the light. Dark is the absence of light. There is no light where there's darkness. So for light to be present means that there's something there. So again, that means that the light is something different because again, the whole world is darkness and it's sin. The whole world is dark. So Christians are light of the world because we are different and we have something that's different. So the attribute of light here that Jesus is focusing on is its visibility. There's lots of attributes of light. You can talk about how light can bring heat. You can talk about how light gives life to everything on the earth. What he's focusing on mostly here is the visibility of light. The fact that light is seen. He says this by when he says, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. If there's a bright city on top of a hill, there's no way you're going to miss that city, right? Because it's very bright and it pierces through even the darkest night. So what that equates to is if we're truly living as Christians, we're supposed to be this light. And this light in darkness cannot be missed. If we're truly living as Christians, then our light cannot be missed. There's a place in Missouri called Fantastic Caverns. It's a tourist attraction, and what it is it's a cave system. So one time, me and my family were going through there, and what the guide did was brought us to a certain point and then demonstrated what's called true darkness, where they turn off all the lights in the cave. When they do that, it really is true darkness. You can't see anything. And you'd be surprised how when there's no light anywhere else in that cave, that one little green dot on the radio almost becomes a beacon. Just that one little light on the radio that shows it's on and working becomes the only thing that you can see. And it becomes a lot brighter than you think it is. So what that means is even a small light is visible when it's really dark. Well, the world is true darkness because it's sin. You can't get any darker than separation from God, which means we as Christians, if we're not visible to the world around us, then that means we're not living right. That means we're not showing forth the attributes that we're supposed to. We're not showing forth the light that we're supposed to show forth. So we have to make sure then that we have to continue to live right. If the electricity goes out at your house, you're probably going to go for a flashlight. Well, what sense would it make if you take the flashlight, you put duct tape over the end of it, you turn it on and say, okay, we're good to go? That really doesn't make sense. If you tried that, your family would probably look at you like you're crazy. Well, they do that because it doesn't even make sense. It's like what Jesus says, no one lights a lamp to put it under a basket. You don't turn on a flashlight so you can cover the flashlight. It's pointless. If you're going to do that, you can't see anything anyway, so you may as well not even have the flashlight. Well, it's the same thing here. If we're not being Christians, then we're not being those lights. We're supposed to be those lights, but we've hidden ourselves. At that point, there's no point to being Christian at all, because we're not doing what we need to do for God. So we have to make sure that we're continuously living correctly. And the last thing there in this section is that we have to be seen for God. Let your light so shine among men that they may see your good works. So we're to let our light shine before men, which is acting like Christians so that people will see us. But we have to remember that the point of us shining our light is not for the glory of men. It's so that men can see us, but it's not for our own glory. This is what the Pharisees did, for example. They did a lot of good deeds and things to show off to the people. If you have your Bibles open, let's turn to the book of John, chapter 12. John chapter 12. And read verses 42 through 43. It says, "Nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. For they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God." So this shows what the Pharisees were not willing to do because they wanted the praise of men more than they cared about the praise of God. And also turn to Matthew chapter 6. Go back to Matthew chapter 6. And read with me there verses 16 through 18. It says, "Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly." So the Pharisees, whenever they would fast and go for a time without eating, they would purposely make themselves look as pitiful as possible so that people would see that they're fasting. They disfigure themselves and make themselves look weak and sad because they wanted people to see that they're fasting. The reason for this was people would look at them and say, well, that's a very holy person right there. They're fasting and they're working for the Lord even to the point of self-deprivation. And they're doing this so that they can basically just show off to the people. Well, this is what Jesus is talking about. The light that we're to show forth and the actions that we're to do as Christians, we don't do it just to be seen by men. We don't do it just to show off our good works. See, the Pharisees were more like the receiver of the glory. Whenever man gave glory, they gave it to them. What we're to be is more of a satellite, more of a relay. When people see us and see our good works, we give that glory straight up to God. We reflect it straight up to God. Because we're not the ones that have the glory. The reason we're acting this way is so that we can show forth God. So that people can see God. The ultimate goal is leading people to Christ. Evangelism. The ultimate goal is so that people will see not our good works, but will see God in us. So when's the last time maybe at work or somewhere in town, you're being different from the world? Let's say you have a coworker and he likes to use foul language and drink and smoke, and you don't do any of that. And then maybe another coworker comes up to you and says, I really like how you're different from that person. I really like how you don't do these things. Do you say thank you, or do you say praise God? Now, there's nothing wrong with saying thank you. There's nothing wrong with accepting when people tell you good job, when people compliment you. But we have to remember that the reason we're letting our light shine for God is so that we can bring men to God. So that men will see God in us. Not so they'll see our works, but so they'll see God in us. We're trying to bring men to God. And we do this by acting different so they see us. And that gives us an opportunity to bring them to God. So we're going to move into our next section. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? All right, so we'll move into our next section, verses 21 through 26. So let's read verses 21 through 26. Matthew, okay, sorry, I'm in the wrong chapter. There we go. Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to your brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says to you, fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary delivers you to the prison. The judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly I say to you, you will by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny. So this is talking about how murder begins in the heart. Once again, Jesus is taking this law and he's applying the heart. He's going deeper into the heart, which is the cause of murder. So Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, you don't have to turn there, but Exodus 20:13 is where in the Old Testament the commandment not to murder is found. Because remember, when Jesus was still walking the earth, they were living under the Old Testament. So Jesus was quoting the Old Testament. So Exodus 20:13 is where God commanded them not to murder. This is also said in one place in the New Testament, James 2:11, whoever murders commits transgression. So murder is defined as the intentional taking of a man's life with malice. So if you're angry with someone and you decide to kill them, this is what murder is. So on this subject, it should be noted that there is a difference between murder and self-defense. In Luke chapter 22, verse 36 and verse 38, this passage records Jesus telling the disciples to buy a sword. Sell what you have and go buy a sword. Well, a sword is not a hunting implement. You can't really hunt with a sword. I mean, I guess you can throw the sword at it, but that's probably not going to work out very well. The animal's probably going to see you a mile away. Nor is it designed really as a utility tool. If you need to cut a tag off a shirt, you're not going to pull out your massive Crusader sword and cut the tag off the shirt. What a sword is, it is designed as a weapon. It's designed to take life. This could be human life. This could be the life of another animal, possibly. But what Jesus is saying here is that it's a defensive weapon. So self-defense is not in question here because that's not a sin. It's not illegal by our standards here in America, and it's not a sin according to the Bible. What Jesus is talking about is the unlawful taking of a man's whole life. But he goes deeper into the heart of the matter. So there were those who thought that as long as they didn't murder, they were fine, right? Because murder is just taking a life. As long as they didn't do that, anything else was okay. They could have ill will or evil thoughts or malice towards someone, and it doesn't matter as long as they didn't actually take that person's life. But Jesus is saying, no, that's not the case. Jesus is saying that being angry without a cause is murder in your heart. You've already murdered that person in your heart. 1 John 3, chapter 15, or chapter 3, verse 15, really drives home this point by saying whoever hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has life abiding in him. So we can't be hating our brethren. So we do have to remember that it's not a sin to be angry. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, it says, be angry and do not sin, nor let the sun go down on your wrath, right? So it's not a sin to be angry, but the sin is what we do with this anger. We've all been angry with someone in our lives. Maybe someone did something that just really annoyed us. It's normal. That happens. The anger is not the sin, but what we do with this anger is a sin. So the word, or could be a sin rather. But the words here, Raca and fool, Raca basically just means empty head or dumb person. And then fool is basically the same thing. It means basically a stupid or dumb person. And what they show is contempt for someone. These words are showing contempt for someone. It's showing contempt for their moral value. It's showing contempt for them and for their worth. And this is what Jesus is really trying to talk about. This is an outburst of anger where you're just showing utter contempt for someone. This is what Jesus is talking about here. So these outbursts of unrighteous anger and contempt. This is what Jesus is trying to tell them not to do. If you're angry with your brother without a cause and you're not trying to get things right, well, hating your brother is already murdering them in your heart. So this encourages us then, if we have something against someone else, we need to make sure that we get those things right. But this isn't saying that every time someone makes us a little bit angry, we have to go to that person. Again, common sense is our best friend when we're going through things like this. But if there's a serious issue that needs to be worked out, then it needs to be worked out. Hanging on to this anger not only is bad for you, but continuously being angry with your brother is not at all a biblical principle. So the next thing he talks about still in that section is talking about reconciliation. When there's problems between the brethren, when he says, leave your gift there before the altar. So this example, again, goes beyond two brethren being annoyed with each other, because things like that are going to happen from time to time. This is talking more about a higher thing, something worse than that. If there's a problem going on, there are times in congregations where brethren won't even speak to each other. They sit on opposite sides of the church building and they go out through the opposite exits because they don't want to see each other or talk to each other or have anything to do with each other. And this is really a very horrible thing to happen in the church. So what this is saying is if there's a problem between you and another brother or sister, you have to take the initiative if it's this serious of a problem. Especially if the matter is your fault, you need to be the one to go to that person. But whether you're guilty or not, you can also take the first step in going to that person to make sure that you can work out these problems. It's your job, it's your duty to go to that brother before you worship God and try to make things right. If you're holding something against another brother and there are bad issues going on, God is not going to accept your worship. You have to make these things right before you continue. So if you go to that person, you're really trying to make sure that you try to get these things reconciled. Now, what if you go to that person and maybe they don't want to be reconciled? Maybe they just don't care. They just want to still be angry. Well, at that point, you've done your part. You've done what you needed to do to be reconciled to them. And at that point, you're okay. So you can go and worship God now. But what it's saying is if you have a problem, you need to try to work these things out to the best of your ability. So on this subject, at the end of the day, common sense with these types of things is your best friend. And we can come up with a million hypotheticals for things like this. Like, what if I've wronged a brother and I never got the chance to apologize, and now they're on the other side of the world, I have no contact information, I'll never be able to contact them again and make things right because I don't know how. Well, what happens then? Does that mean that since I can never make things right with them ever again, does that mean my worship will never be accepted ever again? Well, of course not. That would be silly. So again, common sense, as I said before, is our best thing here. At the end of the day, the best we can do is just do that. We just have to do the best that we can do. It's our job to repent, to bear fruits worthy of repentance, which means show forth that we've repented. Again, repentance is a change of mind leading to a change of action and lifestyle. So we can do our best to make up for these things and make them right after we've repented, and we can do our best to do what is right. And in the end, the best that we can do is what God expects of us. So life really is not black and white, and things are going to happen in life, and there's going to be lots of problems. So again, we should strive to get things right with our brethren, especially before we come and offer worship to God. But at the end of the day, the best that we can do is the best that we can do. So we have to just remember that, again, common sense is our best friend for things like this. So we're going to move into our next section now. Before we do, does anybody have any comments or questions, anything they'd like to say? All right, so we're going to move into our next section of Matthew 5. We're going to go to verses 31 and 32. This right here is a very prevalent problem in the world today. So this says, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let her give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. So this is a big problem in the world today with divorce, marriage, and remarriage. People want to think that you can get divorced for any reason and then you can get married again to anyone that you want. Well, the thing we have to remember here, God never wanted divorce. So we see that thing that says, you have heard that it was said, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Well, God never wanted divorce. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 19. This is a very good place to go for things like this. Matthew chapter 19. And read with me verse 8. Matthew 19, verse 8. This is Jesus talking. We'll put verse 7 in here as well, because this is where the question comes in. They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and put her away?" He said to them, he here being Jesus, so Jesus said to them, "Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery." So what we see here is that God never wanted it. Moses allowed them to get divorced because they were so stubborn and hard-hearted. But from the beginning, God never wanted divorce. He never wanted them to be divorced. God's plan for marriage is one man and one woman for life. We find this in Genesis 2:24. Therefore he shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. And man also is stated in Matthew 19, verse 6, man has no right to break up what God has joined together. Again, when people are married, even people of the world, when people are married, it's God who joins them together. And mankind has no right to break up and separate what God has put together. This is a holy institution for him. We also find in Malachi chapter 2, verse 16, pretty plain English, God hates divorce. Again, that's Malachi 2:16. God hates divorce. God does not like it at all. So any way you look at it, divorce is a bad thing. So one of the questions asked, we know that the only reason to get divorced and remarried is either if your spouse dies or cheats on you. But another question that Christians can ask a lot of times is, can Christians divorce if they don't choose to remarry? To answer that question, we first have to remember that God does not want divorce. Like we already looked at, God hates divorce. So when you're saying, well, maybe I can divorce them as long as I just remain single for the rest of my life, well, still remember that you're still doing something that God hates, something that God does not like at all. He hates divorce. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 10 through 11, let's turn there. This talks a little bit about divorce. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verses 10 through 11. It says, this is Paul speaking, or writing rather. "Now to the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. A wife is not to depart from her husband, but even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And the husband is not to divorce his wife." So there we see, there's where a lot of people say that we can get divorced, but just remain unmarried. So I'll be using the Patterson commentaries, the Max Patterson commentaries. We use those a lot at the Bible Institute of Missouri. I'll be using some quotations from that. So what he says here is there might be a reason to split up. Like if the husband, let's say, provides a choice for her wife. Either you renounce Christianity or we're going to get divorced. This is what he's saying. Well, according to the commentary that Patterson wrote, it says, an unbelieving mate in this pagan land, which would be Canaan at the time, might tire of the Christian mate's allegiance to Christ and insist that she change back to the old lifestyle. So once again, you give up Christ or we're going to get divorced. If not, he threatens to leave. Paul is saying that the Christian is not enslaved to God in verse 15 of 1 Corinthians 7. He's not enslaved to God because of his teaching on marriage in such a way that he would have to give up his allegiance to Christ in order to remain in the marriage. So what this is saying is God does not want divorce. He hates divorce. But if an unbelieving spouse wants to leave or provides you with this choice, what he's saying is don't give up your Christ for the spouse. It's better to give up the spouse for Christ. So he's saying to stay with God, even if that means they do decide to get divorced. Well, at least you're staying with God. But what this does not mean that we can just get divorced and remarried, or rather just divorced anyway, for any silly reason. You know, one of the examples that we use a lot at the school is, well, she burnt the toast, so I'm going to divorce her. Things like this probably happen out there, but we can't just get divorced for any reason. This isn't what this is saying. It's saying it's more of like a special cause. You know, we can't just get divorced just because we want to. The only reason that we can divorce scripturally and be okay with it is if your spouse cheats on you, sexual immorality or fornication. So the only ones who are eligible for marriage then, according to the Bible, are the innocent party in an adulterous relationship, or widows who can remarry only in the Lord, according to 1 Corinthians 7:39, and people who have never been married. Those are the only people who can scripturally marry somebody. So again, the main point here is we're to choose God over everyone and everything else. But again, God hates divorce. He does not want divorce. So again, we can always come up with hypotheticals. What happens if the wife, or even the husband for that matter, is in an abusive relationship? And things like that. Can I get divorced then? Well, again, that doesn't change the fact that God hates divorce. And there are also other options to consider should things that happen. There are legal separations that you can do should things like that happen. You're still married to them, but you're not living with them. You're getting yourself out of that danger zone. But God hates divorce, and we shouldn't just divorce or want to divorce for every reason. In reality, that shouldn't even be an option that's on the table, unless these types of dire circumstances happen. A choice between Christianity and your spouse, or if your spouse cheats on you. Otherwise than that, just because you get into a fight, divorce is still not an option that's on the table. Any kind of fight you get into, you can't just divorce them just because you disagree with them. So that's really what he's trying to say here. So we're going to go into our next section now. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Just a quick couple things. So as you mentioned, it's a very prevalent problem, right? Divorce and remarriage especially. General idea, right, is divorce plus remarriage equals adultery. That's the general idea.
Yeah.
There is one exception, like you mentioned, and that only exception is Matthew 19:9. In other words, whosoever shall put away his wife except it be for fornication and shall marry another committeth adultery. So, in other words, if that is the reason, then you're not committing adultery in the remarriage. In other words. Now, as far as, just kind of a thought here, as far as the other, let's call them extraneous situations or very difficult situations that don't involve adultery. A person who's put into an ultimatum of something that they cannot agree to do, in other words, like you mentioned, do this, sin, or else we're divorcing. Well, that may be the choice of that unbeliever, or perhaps a Christian who's gone astray, right? It could be either. But if that's their choice, that's their choice. They carry that out. But it's similar to if I were threatened with my life to say, renounce God or I'll kill you, I don't just shoot myself because they said that. That's their choice whether they're going to shoot me or not. I have the choice of being faithful to God, period. I don't carry out the step that they're threatening for them. And so that would be, again, we don't put ourselves, if someone's in danger, they need to separate themselves from the danger, like you mentioned. But that doesn't mean they go ahead and carry out the step that's being threatened to them, that whenever neither one of them are good choices.
Yeah.
And so we got to be careful there, is if I'm a spouse and if Rebecca's beating me to death and I just can't handle it anymore, which I'm not going to put myself in that situation, right? But that doesn't mean I go ahead and divorce her and say, well, you're beating me to pieces, so I gotta protect myself, so I'm going to get divorced. I don't have the right to divorce her just because she's beating me. I don't have to put myself in that situation and let her beat me, right? But I don't go ahead, kind of back to my other example, I don't go ahead and pull the trigger on a person who's telling me, you renounce God or I'll kill you. I don't pull the trigger for him, but I don't renounce God. And so there's the thing I don't go ahead and do, but I'm not in control of what they're doing.
Right. So there again, the passage is also talking about, I believe it's also in 1 Corinthians, where it's saying, if the unbeliever wishes to depart, let them depart. This isn't saying that, again, if they're going to divorce you, say, well, okay, well then let's both get divorced. It's mostly saying if they're just wanting to do it, then at that point, like you said, it's on them. It's not on you. And you are not wanting to get divorced. Even if they want to get divorced and you're still a believer, you don't want to get divorced. You want to stay married to them. Right. But if they make it impossible and they're choosing to leave and there's nothing you can do about that, that's where Paul says, let them apart or depart. And at that point, they have to remain single or be reconciled.
Also, I want to We have to remember that the world scoffs at the idea of trying to reconcile difficult situations. And I remember, I've said before, but I remember doing a food pantry lesson here one time, and we were doing a Q&A, and a lady had according to her, she had a daughter who was in an abusive relationship, and she asked if she could divorce, and I said no. There were other options, and if that is the case, then don't, basically like Paul said, let the other person do the wrong. You do what is necessary to try to solve or resolve whatever that problem may be. And she scoffed at it. And that's how the world is. They scoff at logical, biblical corrections on how to solve difficult things, because we can't be the ones who jump on board with the divorce when bad things come up. And that's kind of how we got to the situation we are today. When bad things come, we don't want to sit down and work it out. We want to abandon ship, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's why the Bible is saying that we're to keep it going as long as we can. We're to stay in that relationship as long as we possibly can. Because God, again, hates divorce, and he doesn't want that to happen. So like you said, if it comes down to life or death, if you're going to die when you stay in that house, like if you're being beat to death, well, then you have to leave the home in order to save yourself, but that doesn't mean you have to divorce that person simply because we want to keep together what God is doing. So yes, those are very good comments. So is there any other comments?
Just one other. And of course, if a person were to get divorced for a scriptural reason, in other words, somebody cheated on somebody and that person will put the guilty party away, the innocent party is not required to remarry anybody. They can stay single if they choose. There's no scripture that would teach that they have to get remarried. The fact of the matter is, it's just they had the one reason that they could get a scriptural divorce, right? They may not ever get married again, the innocent party, but they can divorce without getting remarried. But obviously, they're the only ones in that situation who could remarry.
Yeah, and I've seen it before. I've heard examples of someone, I believe it was a preacher actually, who his wife cheated on him, and he decided to divorce and just remain single and be like Paul and remain single to continue out the work. And I've also, I believe, heard of an example of someone who could get scripturally divorced and remarried because their spouse cheated on them, but they chose not to because they wanted to try to keep working it out. So again, like you said, it is open. If you have the right, you have the right. You don't have to go through with it. If you do, you can. And then you can either remain single if you want to, or you can be married to someone else. So that is a very good point. So the next section then that we're going to go over is found in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. And this will be talking about going the second mile. So once again, this is something that's very relevant to us as Christians today. So let's go ahead and read Matthew 5, 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. So let's focus on the first part where he says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So first off, that is an Old Testament commandment. In Deuteronomy 19, let's go ahead and turn to Deuteronomy chapter 19. Let's read the Old Testament commandment that Jesus is talking about. Deuteronomy 19. Let's read verses 17 through 21. This says, Then both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who serve in those days. And the judges shall make careful inquiry. And indeed, if the witness is a false witness who has testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So you shall put away the evil from among you. And those who remain shall hear and fear, and hereafter they shall not again commit such evil among you. Your eye shall not pay. It shall be for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. So this is an Old Testament commandment. So the problem that Jesus is talking about is he's not changing the law. Again, he's not saying this is what he did in the old law, here's what he's going to do in the new law, although he is putting into place the new law, he's fulfilling the old law. So what he's doing is not changing, but rather fulfilling and he's following this old law example to perfection. So what's going on here is that the people of the time use this eye for an eye to be more of like a personal revenge type deal. If someone slaps you, you can slap them. If someone does something to you, you can do something to them. Well, it's an eye for an eye, right? So if they do something to me, then I can do something back to them too. So basically they had this vigilante type of a mindset where they could get personal revenge, get back at someone who did this to them. And the thing about this law is it did not give the people the right to take these matters into their own hands. Even when we saw about in verse 17, in that Deuteronomy passage, what it was saying was go to the priests, right? So it's not saying here that they had the right to act in any way they wanted to. They didn't have a right to do personal revenge. Justice was to be served, but it wasn't to be served by taking it into your own hands. Rather, if something like this were to happen, you would go before the courts, before the judge, before the God-ordained government who has a right to do this. Again, we find in Romans chapter 13:4, even in the New Testament, the government does not bear the sword in vain. Once again, that sword is a weapon, not a tool, which means that the government has the right to carry out all forms of justice and punishment, including capital punishment and the death penalty, if such is necessary. So what this is saying here is that we're not supposed to just get personal revenge to get back at someone who hurts us. Rather, this law, even in the Old Testament, was designed so that people could go to the law enforcement at the time to get these problems situated, to get them out of the way. But what they were doing was they were taking matters into their own hands, and they were getting revenge and things like that. And that's what Jesus is really tackling there. So when it says do not resist, what it means is to set oneself against, to set yourself against, or to oppose. And once again, this is still the idea of personal revenge or vigilantism. So it's saying do not resist an evil person. This isn't saying that we have to just sit still and take beatings. Once again, we also saw that Jesus justified self-defense. It'd be kind of hard to imagine Jesus saying you can defend yourself, but if someone's doing something bad to you, you have to sit there and take it. This isn't condemning defense. This is more condemning aggression and personal revenge. So if someone slaps you on your cheek, you're not supposed to lash out and slap them back. That doesn't mean you don't defend yourself if someone's trying to beat you up, but you're not trying to get personal revenge on them. That's what this is saying here. It's saying that we are not to take personal revenge. We're not to take that personal aggressive action against them. So then when it also says go the second mile, go the extra mile. So a little backstory, a little history here is in Roman times, a Roman official could demand your service. So what they used this when they compelled Simon of Cyrene to carry Jesus' cross in Matthew chapter 27, verse 32. So a Roman official could basically recruit a citizen of the country to do anything they needed to do, to go with them to a certain place or to do this certain work. And what Jesus says here is if they compel you to go 1 mile with them, go with them too. So this is the idea of going above and beyond. So we also have to remember that nothing in the Bible contradicts anything else in the Bible, right? So one commandment cannot be followed by going against another commandment. So the Bible also says if a man will not work, neither will he eat. This is 2 Thessalonians 3:10. So it says from him who wants to borrow, don't keep them from that. If someone wants this or tries to take this, don't hold that from them. But then it also says if a man will not work, neither will he eat. Well, again, this is talking more about people who are choosing not to work and rather freeload, as we might say it, off other people. This isn't talking about people who have legitimate needs. Those are the people that we are to help. That's what's being said here. So what we have, I don't know what you guys have here in Oklahoma, but what we have, especially in Springfield, Missouri, is we'll have people who are homeless, but they're not really homeless. The preacher at our congregation says that he's seen some of the same homeless people on the same street corner for years since they moved in. So basically, it's not that they really need things. It's that they've made a profession out of begging and out of getting money like this. These are people that we're not to help because these are the people who don't need the help. These aren't actual needy people. So if they're not choosing to work, neither shall they eat because they can work. They can work. This is talking about people who can't work, who actually have a legitimate need. These are the people who we actually need to help. And this is what Jesus is saying here. Those who are needy need the help. But again, that's why we have to be careful not to just let someone freeload off of us. Because if a man will not work, neither will he eat. So we need to make sure that we help those who are in need, but this isn't saying that we can let ourselves be taken advantage of. So our time is basically up, so we have a few more minutes if anyone has any closing questions or comments about anything. All right, well, thank you for your attention this morning. We'll continue with our worship service, I believe, before long. At this time, you're dismissed.